Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's important conversation, Restorative Justice and Victims' Rights in Texas, Survivors Supporting Survivors. My name is Anita Vadva. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Executive Director of Restorative Houston. We're so glad you've joined us for this powerful conversation hosted as part of National Crime Victims' Rights Week and presented by Restorative Houston. We are grateful for funding from the National Association of VOCA Assistance Administrators through a grant from the Office for Victims of Crime within the Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice. This webinar brings together a panel of courageous survivors, advocates, and community leaders who are actively shaping how restorative justice and victims' rights intersect in Texas. Our focus today is on survivor-centered approaches and the power of healing through community and connection. We are honored to be joined by Lakeydra Houston, victim advocate and founder of KeyFit LLC, bringing her voice and lived experience to empower others on their healing journeys. Kel Mabatah, founder of the Kel Strong Mabatah Foundation, who uses his platform to uplift and advocate for survivors. And finally, Cheryl Miller of Quantum Circles Consulting and Training, whose work has been instrumental in restorative justice, victim offender dialogue in the state. Throughout this session, we'll explore how restorative justice can create space for healing, accountability, and transformation, centered on the needs and voices of survivors. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our social media and website after this. Please drop your questions at any point. You don't have to wait until the end. This way, we'll be more likely to get to it. And closed captions are available. To turn them on, just look at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the CC or Show Captions button. On some versions, it might appear under More with 3 dots, especially if you're on a mobile device or a tablet. And if you want to adjust the size of the captions, you can go into your Zoom settings under Accessibility. We want to take a moment to introduce ourselves. We are a community-based organization. We've been around for a decade. We've been a 501c3 since June of last year, and our mission is to create a multi-generational network of restorative justice practitioners who build community and repair harm at the individual, community, and systemic levels in Houston. We always acknowledge that restorative justice practices and the philosophy comes from Indigenous peoples around the world. And in this space in Houston, the land on which we reside originally and rightfully belongs to the Karankawa, Ishak, Huahutecan, and Sana peoples, among others. And now I'd like to invite our panelists to come on screen. And I'll begin by speaking with each of you about your journey supporting survivors. And you all do this in multiple ways. You're multi-hyphenates, you're public speakers, you're writers, you're consultants. And so what I'll do is read a fuller bio of each of you. Attendees, they'll be speaking for about 15 minutes each. And then we'll kind of open up questions to the whole group. And we're going to start with Cheryl Miller, who owns Quantum Circles Consulting and Training and provides transformative training in economic empowerment and restorative justice. Cheryl's been a mediator with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in the Victim Offender Mediation Dialogue for 20 years, with over 1,000 hours of experience providing victims of violent crimes the opportunity to meet face to face with offenders. Cheryl is also a survivor of sexual assault and has worked closely with survivors for years. Her personal story was featured in People.com and Adam Carolla's Take a Knee podcast. Cheryl is a TEDx, TAMU speaker, and author of Enough Silence, Creating Space for Survivors of Sexual Assault Through Restorative Justice. A beautiful book. I just finished it last week, and I highly recommend it. So Cheryl, welcome. It's so great to meet you. I'm going to ask about victim offender mediator dialogue. But I want to talk about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, and how did you discover restorative justice?
Um, I, now I just do a little bit of consulting, still do a little bit of writing. But before I launched my own business, I I operated a housing program for women who had been formerly incarcerated. And it was when I started there, the executive director that I had replaced had been invited to speak at a restorative justice conference about reentry. And so they asked me to take her spot, even though I was new to it. And so I ended up going to this restorative justice conference. I had never heard of it. And then as I was walking through the booths, like you see at all conferences, I saw a booth for victim offender mediation dialogue through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And it piqued my interest since I was working with ex-offenders and I have a background in mediation. And so I went and inquired about it. And 3 days later, I was in their first volunteer training. And that was back in, I want to say 1999, 2000, somewhere around there. And so that's when I started volunteering for their program.
Can you tell us what exactly is victim offender mediation and dialogue?
Okay, the VOMD program, Victim Offender Mediation Dialogue, is for victims of severe violent crime. It provides them the opportunity to meet face to face with their offenders in prison. It's a part of the Texas Bill of Rights, where victims have the right to meet with their offender face to face. And so the way that works is that if a victim wants to meet with their offender, they would contact victim services. It's always victim initiated and it's voluntary. And so they can contact the Victim Services Division of TDCJ and request a mediation.
And can you walk us through a little bit of what does a victim offender mediation dialogue, what kind of training did it require for you to be able to be a mediator in this process?
When I did the training, it was 96 hours. It was 6 days straight. And then we took a week off and came back and did another 6 days. I think now that the training that they've done since then has been a 40-hour training. And so, it's just an additional training on top of any other kind of mediation training that you would do.
How did Texas become at the forefront of doing this? Because I think a lot of people aren't aware that Texas was the first state and to offer this to victims, to survivors, and that to this day it's not even happening in all 50 states. So can you tell us a little bit about the history?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure exactly all of it, but I do know the reason it started was because there was a victim who wanted to meet with her offender and who was in prison, and they wouldn't allow it. The wardens in the prison system said, no, you can't do that. And so she fought it and took it to legislature and said, why do I not have the right to meet with the person who committed the crime? Why does this person have more rights than I do? And because of that, that's where it was put into the Bill of Rights in Texas, that victims have the right to meet with their offender through, right now, it's only through TDCJ, through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Post adjudication, it's for cases that have already been convicted and the offenders are either in prison or on parole.
And how many people, how would someone who's been a victim of a crime like this, and is it for all crimes? Because
It's
your
for
book is
violent,
about, it's for violent crimes.
yeah, severe violent crimes. And so most of the types of crimes are murder, sexual assault, you know, a capital murder, that type, DWI manslaughter. So it's mostly violent crimes, severe violent crimes.
Did you feel going into this, did you ever have any hesitation about engaging in this process, or did you ever have any doubts about, I guess, the potential of this to not re-victimize anyone and to offer healing or offer what a survivor needs?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I write about this in my book. The very first mediation I did, it was a murder case, and the woman's only child was murdered. And the way the process works, kind of back it up a little bit, the way the process works is if a victim contacts victim services and says, I want to meet with the offender, then we set up a meeting and we meet with the victim. And so I went and met with this woman, and she told me what happened. And her goal for doing mediation was to find out exactly what happened to her son. She needed to know the last details of his life. And so then after I met with her, the process, you go and you meet with the offender and you ask them if they'd be willing to participate. For an offender to participate, they have to take responsibility for the crime. If they don't take responsibility for the crime, the case is closed, because it would just be a potential for a future harm and denial and that type of thing. But if the offender is willing to take responsibility, then we start a 3 to however long month process, meeting with the victim and the offender at least 3 times separately. And then the case is staffed with the staff at the Victim Services Division to determine if it would be a good fit to bring the two people together for a face-to-face meeting. And if it's approved, then we set up the meeting. The victim goes to the prison or the parole office, and we do the face-to-face meeting. So that very first case, I went and met with the offender, and when he told me he would participate, he took responsibility. When he described the details of the murder, it was horrible. It was, I'm not going to give any details, for one, because it's confidential, but the other, it was just horrible. And I remember walking out of that prison thinking, how in the world am I going to bring a mother here to listen to the details, these horrible details of how her child died? But I also knew it wasn't my decision, whether she heard it or not. And so anyway, we go to the prison and we go through the whole process, and, she did everything. We finally do the mediation. And afterwards, it was a lot shorter than I expected it to be, because it was my first case. And I had almost felt like I hadn't done a good job because she was like ready to go so quickly. But afterwards, she said to me, when I asked her how she felt, after meeting with him, she said, well, the only way I can explain it is this: there's been this boulder sitting on my chest for the last 10 years, because it was 10 years later. It's been sitting on my chest for the last 10 years, slowly crushing the life out of me and the breath out of me. And now it's gone, and I can breathe again and I can live again. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, there's something really powerful here. This is profound. Something that is so tragic and so horrible that could be turned around to be life-giving and being able to breathe again. It was that I was hooked after that.
And is that quite common in the cases that you've done? What are the, I guess, what are the results of this? What does this do for victims? And then does the state of Texas, are they evaluating this, or is this just, how are they marking what the success of this is?
Yes, that's been my experience every time. All victims go in it for different reasons. They have different goals and what they're trying to accomplish and different things that they want to see. But it has been researched, probably after like the first, I want to say maybe 10 years. The University of Texas did a longitudinal study over the program, and they did assessments for the victims, the offenders, and even the mediators. And so I was a part of that longitudinal study. And the results came out, several years later, and the satisfaction rate for victims was very, very high. They felt it met their needs. It, provided healing. It provided what they had expected going into it. It was also effective for offenders, but not as high as it was for victims. But that's a victim-initiated process, so it's
Right.
designed for victims.
Are there restorative processes available, or is it even possible if the person who committed the crime does not take accountability for the actions?
Yes, they have. They do. They in the past, they've offered what's called surrogate mediations, where if the person has not been prosecuted or doesn't take responsibility, they have a database of offenders who have said they want to participate and they can't initiate it. And so they would look at that database to see if there's any offenders that have committed similar crimes that would be willing to speak with them. And that's part of the one of the things in the book that I wrote, follows the story of a woman who went through a surrogate mediation with an offender. So
How does that end up being? I think some people would think, A, what would that offer if you're not in the shoes of the person? What does it offer to meet with someone who isn't the person who harmed you? And B, why would that person even agree to meet with a victim who is not the person that they directly harmed?
well, there's certain things, even though they may not be the person who did the harm to them, there are certain commonalities and behaviors. And so there could be things that a victim could understand more by talking to somebody who's committed a similar crime. And I know that's the case in the the one that I wrote about in the book. There was just things that she just wanted to know and thought he might have some insight in because he had committed a similar crime. And so why an offender would do it, there could be a lot of reasons. I know for the case that I'm talking about, it was a part of his ongoing responsibility for the harm that he had done, trying to make sure that he was always aware of how much damage his crime had committed in the lives of others. And so being reminded of that was his way of trying to stay on the straight and narrow and not be committing crimes anymore.
Can you speak to a little bit about what has being involved in these restorative processes with other people done for you as a survivor? Like, how has it impacted you in that way?
Well, it's given me a tremendous amount of insight into human nature, and particularly around the issues of violent crime and trauma. And seeing what others have gone through and how they've survived and how the process has helped heal them. Before I actually became a volunteer mediator, the person that was running the program at the time suggested I participate in my own mediation, and so I did. I did a victim offender mediation before I started volunteering, and it was probably in the top 5 things that's ever happened to me in my entire lifetime. And that including marriage and the birth of my children. I mean, it was just profoundly healing. And I've seen the same thing happen in the lives of so many victims in the last 20 years that I've mediated with.
Thank you so much. I wasn't aware of that. There's a similar story with Linda White, who we featured her documentary Meeting with the Killer a few days ago. And she was also offered the opportunity, and at first she declined. But once she herself became a volunteer, that's what then opened her up to the idea of doing it for herself. You talk about this in your book, just in terms of language. We're using the language of offender, victim, and a lot of people in the restorative justice field, don't try to avoid using these binaries. Can you speak about the language of victim versus survivor for you?
Well, just just to clarify, the reason I use that language is because that's the language of the program. It's victim offender mediation dialogue. That's what it's called. And
Right.
so that's how it's identified. And in Texas, if you're in prison, at least right now, you are called an offender. They have to have a name tag on them all the time. And it's got a big red thing across the top. It says offender. So that's just the language of the state. Um, as far as victims being called a survivor or a victim, to me, I believe it's their choice of how they want to identify. I know a victim who said that she stopped using the word victim because she was told she wasn't she didn't need to be a victim, and she needed to consider herself a survivor. And so she did for a few years, but then she's like, but no, I am a victim. I was the victim of a crime. And so I think we need to give whether victim or survivor, whatever they're called, we give them the autonomy of how they want to identify themselves.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to name that because we are using that language, which could be confusing for people in the restorative justice field, and that is the language of the system. Last question before we move on, speaking with Lakeydra, what are the biggest misperceptions about victim offender mediation and dialogue?
Uh, that victims wouldn't want to meet with their offenders. That's the most common one, is that why would somebody want to do that? I have people say I couldn't imagine being in the same room with somebody who did that to me or to a loved one. And just because you don't understand it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not something that somebody else would understand and if you've never been a victim of, and there are victims of violent crime who do not want to meet with their offenders, it's just a program that works for some of them, that's what they want. But I think that's the most common one, is that why would somebody want to do that?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you named that it's not just people who haven't been victims of violent crime, but also people who have been. So it just all goes down back to honoring an individual's autonomy and their choice for how they want to name themselves and what they want to do with their
Right.
journey. So thank you so much. We'll hear from you again in a little bit. And Lakeydra, I'd like to read your bio. Lakeydra is a UNI Veterans Employment Specialist, a passionate sexual assault advocate, and dedicated veteran resource specialist who bridges the gap between trauma and healing. She's a well-known voice for matters in CSA, MST, child sexual assault, military sexual trauma, and mental health conversations. She has an extensive background of 20 years in the Air Force and 10 years in policing. As a survivor and advocate, Lakeydra has the ability to mentor and inspire survivors. As a founder of KeyFit LLC and Voices We Stand, Lakeydra raises awareness, offers resources, and inspires change for survivors of sexual trauma. So, Lakeydra, I mean, really, when I read your bio, it's like, oh, she's a police officer. Oh, she was this. Oh, she was this. You've been in so many systems. I'm wondering, how did you tell us a little bit about your life and your journey towards becoming a survivor advocate?
Yes, so a little bit about my life. I'm a survivor that started at the age of 6 years old, being molested by family members, went off to the military, that occurred again. Also dealing with my sister, her own personal story of being sexually assaulted and then end up being murdered. And once that happened, I started saying, you know what, I need to step in and help other survivors, victims or survivors, get through what I've been through. That kind of started my journey, and I started becoming an advocate and helping those in need.
Thank you for sharing that. That is a tremendous amount of multiple victimization. Can you talk about, you know, how were you supported along the way, or were you supported um, to get to the point where you're strong enough to now speak with other survivors and try to support them?
Yeah, so honestly, I was not supported. It was one of those things where in the family we didn't talk about it. It was, oh, were we sure this really happened, or do you think that you've kind of made this up as a kid? It was just a weird situation. So it was no support. Um, I just I just found something inside of me that says, you know what, I seen this happen to my sister. I seen it happen to me, and our voices were just shut down. So now, what am I supposed to do? I want to help those who went through the same thing that I've been through. So I became everybody else's support system, even though I didn't have it. I was like, no, I can't let this happen to somebody else. So I stepped in and started helping others.
Um, who's your support system now?
My therapist. um, I will be honest, my support system is my therapist and other survivors. We became a sisterhood. Even, Cheryl, she sent me her book. So just listening to other stories has encouraged me to continue fighting and gives me the strength to continue fighting.
I was struck by your story when I listened to another podcast that you were in about enduring that through childhood, enduring that with your sister, and then going into the military. And so I'm just curious, like, what drew you in the military in the first place? Um, and 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 what transpired? What was the culture of the military? Because I think when we talk about, well, at least as an outsider, as someone coming from the education field, I had never heard of this term MST. So if you could tell us a little bit more, it didn't surprise me, but just tell us a
Mhm.
little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what drew me in the military is I was suffering from trauma from the things that happened to me as a kid, and I started experimenting with drugs. And it got to a point where I was like, I can't stay or continue this lifestyle. Like, I have to try something different. So I went to college, didn't do well, failed. So I was like, military or something else. And so I decided to join the military just to start over and kind of run from that trauma, unfortunately. And then when I got in, within 6 months of me getting in, I was sexually assaulted by my leader, who was supposed to actually guard me and protect me during my transitioning from being a civilian to the military member. And so I didn't understand what MST, which is military sexual trauma, I didn't understand what that meant until probably 5, 6 years in, because we didn't discuss sexual assault in the military during that time. And this
Mhm.
is 2002. So when I start hearing stories and everything, I was like, wow, that happened to me. And then we shared our stories, and a lot of women, we started supporting each other and understanding what that meant and fighting um, against our perpetrators in the military.
Can you talk about, I mean, what that is like and what are the rules regarding this? Because we have, the traditional criminal courts or the civil courts, but then it also feels like the military is very insular and almost private or secretive. And so you already have a stigma around being victimized as a sexual assault survivor, and now you're in this other institution. So how do they handle it? How do they not handle it? What changes are being made? What changes are not happening? This is a huge question. So,
Yes. So, how they're handling it in the beginning, they will kick you out. So, if you reported against your leader or reported against your perpetrator who was in the good old boy system, you would get kicked out of the military. So nobody spoke about it because of the fact that we would get discharged. We would get a dishonorable discharge, which means we couldn't find a good job, which means we would not get our military benefits. So they said, this is the boys' military, them being leaders, and you even see it on Google. You know, you're in a man's military. Shut up and take it. That's how they would talk to us. So now you have to fight that stigma of like, should I say anything? And then, so a long time, we didn't discuss it. And later on, I think in 2019, the whole story with Vanessa Guillen, who was sexually assaulted and then, or sexually harassed, and then later found out she was murdered. When they were looking for her, we started the Vanessa Guillen Act. So we had nothing in place. If you went and reported, it was supposed to be restricted where your command didn't know. But if you reported it, your command would find out, because if your commander is cool with the attorney or friends with the attorney, they will tell them everything. So we had no protection when we did report. And so we fought for the Vanessa Guillen Act, where it allows us to report and not, our command does not have any control on what happens to us. And so that's kind of what happened. And understand, a lot of our commanders were the ones that were sexually assaulting us. So think about it. You're saying, hey, I don't want them to know, but they're still finding out. And then guess what? You're getting kicked out and reprimanded for it. So now we're fighting for that.
how do they, how do they do a dishonorable discharge? They don't need to justify it. They just can do it. And you know
They
what the reason is, but there's no reason given. That's official.
correct.
So, and okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So how they would do it is say you failure to adapt. That's the term they would use. If you didn't listen to what your commander did, you're failure to adapt. And so that's how they would get you out.
Is that going to be your next book, Lakeydra? Failure to adapt?
I
Already
don't know.
failure to adapt. I feel like that is such an interesting term, right? Failure for you to adapt to this system. So tell us, when you say we are working on the Vanessa Guillen Act, who is the we that you're part of?
So the we are the survivors. I know there's an act that came out in 2021, but survivors are trying to taper that, change her act around to make sure that we are actually getting investigations outside of the military. So we got a bill, the Vanessa Guillen bill, which helped out a little bit. However, it's more that needs to be done. And so women are not reporting, and men are not reporting. We're not reporting at all, due to the fact that our chain of command still has access to the investigations.
So is anyone getting reprimanded? Is there any kind of consequences happening?
Um, no, honestly, I mean, we have like 73,000 in 2023. We had 73,000 survivors or victims who did a sexual assault report, and only 4% were convicted. So there's nothing really happening.
Are they
Even with
convicted in a
kids.
military court or are they convicted? Okay.
Depends. So
Okay.
if a military member sexually assaults another military member, it would be a military court, but sometimes it can be in civilian courts as well. So it just depends on the jurisdiction.
So what would you like to see change systemically, or is it even possible to change the military culture? Or is that inherent in the military culture?
Honestly, what I would like to see change is the fact that we get the power out of our superiors' hands, and that more conviction happens. And then also, Cheryl talked about even having those conversations with our chain of command that did these things to us. I wish we would have other options on how do we handle these situations, because sometimes what happens is we'll make our statement on what happened, and we don't hear anything for like another 2 to 3 years. So just informing us of the process, like what options do we have, giving the control back to us survivors, yeah, that would be something I would love for us to change.
And Lakeydra, I know you're not engaging, or you're not, facilitating any victim offender dialogue. You have a different you're doing different work, but you had spoken about, I think in this podcast, you had spoken about that you did talk to the person who assaulted
Mhm.
you. And can you talk about what that conversation was, and would you have wanted to participate in a process like victim offender mediation dialogue?
You know, um, talking to somebody, and I think, having someone like Cheryl that is there who understands, what's going on as far as the survivor and the perpetrator. I think it was harmful for me because we had a conversation with someone who wasn't certified to have this mediation, and the person did not have accountability for what they did. So it was like re-triggering to me. So that's the part of, like, understanding like what accountability truly looks like, and making sure the person's ready to have the conversation with the survivor or victim. That's where, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that goes to what Cheryl was mentioning earlier. If they're not accountable for their actions in the first place, then how are you going to have this conversation? Um, can you talk about also your time as a police officer? Um, more specifically, I'm sure you saw it. I'm sure you worked with victims, right? I'm sure, yeah, more specifically about the culture of the police force. Was there overlap between your experiences in military and your experience as a police officer? And how does your experience as a police officer inform how you support victims now?
So my policing was more of military policing, and then I did some military policing in Oklahoma. So I had two jurisdictions. Um, it was interesting as a police officer responding to a sexual assault and hearing other officers say, "Oh, she wanted it," or those things. Or when a man was sexually assaulted, they would say, "Oh, he deserved it. He's gay," or things like that. You would hear just the verbiage was hard. So it was sad for me to go to the hospitals where they were as a cop and sit there and have my coworker do the investigation, and just like the whole time, "Oh, well, you sure this happened?" Or, it seems like, how were you dressed? Like, why would you ask a victim how they were dressed? And so it triggered me a lot on, like, wow, if I would report, is this how they're going to talk to me too? So it was also talking to, other police officers saying, hey, how you talk to victims can trigger them as well. And so just understanding what it is to be a survivor of this, and then trying to help my other counterparts understand what that meant on how you talk to survivors. But it was, it was very tough. It was, the victim shaming in a law enforcement is huge. It's bad, and we need to work on that.
Were they open when you spoke to them? And how did you speak to them in terms of that? Like, how does story impact them in any way, to help reshape their thinking? Or
So the only way I could reach out to them was let them know that, hey, I'm a survivor. I was a victim. And then when they saw that and heard it from me, they were like, what? Like, yeah, this is what I went through. I didn't have a dress on. I had a military uniform on when it happened to me. So what you say and how you can offend people, that's real. So we just talked a little bit more about that, and just hearing my personal story, and plus bringing in other people who were sexually assaulted that was in as a cop with me, bringing them in and let them talk to them about their personal stories. And it was even a male cop that spoke. When they heard that, they're like, wow. So it did change in some aspects, but you still have those people who are like, whatever, I don't, whatever, this is,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I asked that because as an educator, we had to report a lot of students who were being sexually assaulted. And I remember some police officers sharing with the young people, like, I've been through this myself. Um, and it seems like a lot of us are drawn to professions to heal ourselves, or
Mm-hmm.
to heal others who have been through similar circumstances. Can you speak of I know you talked about the work that you do now with supporting victims and survivors. How do you support people who have been victims of police violence? And what rights do
Mhm.
they have access to in the state of Texas?
So as far as police violence, I mean, do you mean like, the killings or what, and
Killings,
what?
killings,
Yeah.
primarily
Yeah.
killings to start with, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'm the one that's a loudmouth with the sign that runs up and down the street. That's me. What I always tell them is,
I thought that was
no,
me, Lakeydra. I'm sorry.
no, that's
Yeah.
that's me. It's pretty bad. So what I normally it's hard to get victim services because when anybody is a victim or survivor of a crime, you have a victim services person within the police department that's supposed to reach out to them. Well, if you are a person who's a victim of police violence, who do you go to? You can't, your victim services person won't contact you. It's so hard. So I'm the one that helps out with the, finding an attorney, crime victims compensation, ensuring they have, the mental health services are getting paid just in case they're not employed, those things. So we have we have different services to reach out, but I'm telling you, it is so hard when you are a victim of police violence. So I try to give them all the information from the Office of Attorney General here in Texas, but I mean, sometimes they'll deny their claims.
What what would you what is bringing you hope right now in the work that you're doing?
What's bringing me hope is knowing the fact that whether I save one person's life, that's what's bringing me hope. Whoever, just making an impact. That's what brings me hope, and making sure that I fight to ensure that the next generation or my generation doesn't have to go through what we go through. So it's like hope that knowing, even though this is a struggle right now, knowing that change can happen and it will happen. I'm very hopeful of that. So that's what gives me hope that I can help others.
Yeah, and those are the day-to-day things that keep us all afloat, I'm
Hmm.
thinking, including the stories that Cheryl told, doing that first dialogue and feeling like, oh, I didn't do a great job, and then to hear what that does for a survivor. So I'm just really in awe of all of you. So I want to thank you, and I'm going to introduce Kel, and we'll come back to speaking to all of you. But Kel Mabatah is a survivor of a near fatal attack that resulted in a severe traumatic brain injury requiring 4 major brain surgeries. Kel faced complete paralysis on his right side and the loss of his ability to speak. With unwavering faith, perseverance, and determination, Kel defied the odds and rebuilt his life, relearning how to walk, talk, and thrive despite his limitations. Through his Kel Strong Mabatah Foundation, Mabatah strives to raise awareness about the long-term impact of violent crimes and highlight the critical role of rehabilitation, support, and community in the healing process. So, Kel, welcome. It's great to be connected to you. So, can you take us back to that moment in 2014, and share what happened? You were in Nigeria, um, and what emerged once you woke up from your coma?
Yes. First of all, my story is very long, so I'll summarize it as short as I can. But I'm working on a book detailing the full stories of the ups and downs, so it's going to be a must read, trust me. But to summarize, on December 3rd, 2014, I was a victim of a brutal attack on my place of work. Um, to summarize, I just closed from work that night, and I live on the same compound as a company. So I walked back to my house, and as soon as I walked back outside to call my mom to check on her to see how she's doing, because she lives here in Houston. So after that, I went back inside, ate some food, and then 20 minutes later, I heard some loud bangs at the door. At first I thought it's my security because sometimes they'll come and check on me, but these bangs were different. So once I realized, okay, someone's trying to bust down my door, I have burglar bars on the inside of my doors. So I locked those. I went back. I ran to the back of the house, and I called the police. They usually escort me anytime I need to leave the compound, but the line was busy. So I kept calling, but the line was busy. So I just came back in the same room, hoping that they won't break down this door until I could get help. but they kept kicking the bangs were getting louder, and then all of a sudden they kicked the door down, and about four or five of them entered. They all had weapons, and one guy he threw the TV down like he threw the TV down that I was watching like he was mad about something. And one guy once one guy had a long rifle, like a gun, a long rifle, and when I saw it, I put my hands up and then pointed the gun in my face. That's when he said words I'll never forget. Pointed the gun in my face. He's like, you know, you're going to die tonight, right? Then then he asked me, okay, where's the money? So I pointed to where the money was, but at the time I knew it was only like a few, it's like $100. And I know that they know that we're a big company in Nigeria, so I should have access to like thousands of dollars. So knowing that, I was like, knowing that I lived on the compound where the office is, I said, listen, I can take you to the office to get you as much money as you want. Just don't kill me. But that's when they refused. They told me, no, shut up, get down on the ground on your hands and knees. So that then let me know, okay, they didn't come for money. They came to kill me, just like you said. No, they just figured we might as well get something from him before he take his life. So I got down on the ground on my hands and knees, like they said. I closed my eyes, thinking, okay, I'm never going to see my mom again, never going to see my dad again, never going to see my sister again, never going to see my friends again, because I thought they were going to blow my brains out. Yeah, I don't know how long I was unconscious, but all of a sudden regained consciousness, but I was on my back in a completely different in a completely different location. So once I realized I was on my back, I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. So when I tried to yell for help, I couldn't yell. So I didn't know what was wrong for me. But all of a sudden I heard a car pull up to my house and then some voices. So I thought they'd come back. So I closed my eyes and pretend like I was dead, like I'm sure they died. But it turns out it was the police. So once the police found me, they picked me up and put me in the back of the truck, and that's the last thing I remember until I woke up a week later out of my coma. Um, yeah, so as a result of that attack, which is still a mystery to this day, of who and why. I have four major brain injuries. I was completely paralyzed from the whole right side. I couldn't speak. So over these past 10 years, I had to learn how to walk again, talk again, and live again. But I don't I don't let that injury, I don't let my limitations, I don't let my disabilities, I don't let any of that define me. I still do what I want. It just been a little different how I do it. Now, I'm a professional bodybuilder. I started a foundation that's helping other people that have gone through similar injuries like I have. I view this as a blessing in disguise.
Thank you so much, Kel. I mean, your story is so um it's just it's like it's confounding because you don't know who these people were, you don't know the motive. There's always questions around certain crimes, and it's there's no, we were on a healing circle with Janet Connors yesterday, who did a victim offender dialogue with one of the men who murdered her son. And she said there's no closure. A lot of times people use the word closure because it's the criminal justice system has to close a case, or, we need to end the news story, so we're going to close it. So how have you found the strength? You've had to go through intense rehabilitation, and if anyone sees photos of Kel, he is a bodybuilder. He is like an award-winning bodybuilder. So how physical rehabilitation, mental, emotional, um, what are the what helped provide strength for you? And also this happened in Nigeria, correct? Um,
Yes.
so what does victim services look like in Nigeria? What does the government offer someone who's a victim of a crime like that?
Okay, well, first I'll answer your first question. What kept me going is my faith in God. I know my story is a testimony because there's certain things that happen at night that if they didn't happen, I wouldn't be here today. So my faith in God keeps me going, knowing that he gave me a second chance of life for a good reason, and that's what keeps me going. And also my faith in God, also like my family, they keep me going. My scholarship recipients, the people I'm helping, all those things keep me going. Because like I said, I shouldn't be here, and the fact that I'm here means that God's not done with me, and I still have to fulfill His plans. So that in a nutshell, that's what keeps me going. Um, and to answer your second question, it's non-existent. You know, that country is very corrupt. So there's not this there's nothing like victim services, nothing. You know, it's like I you have to pay them to do the job. And even then, you're not guaranteed to get the results because it's up to them, you know, whether they feel like doing the work or not, you know. But to answer your question, like yeah, it's non-existent in Nigeria.
What do you know if someone's a survivor of a violent crime, not from Texas, and they're coming from a different context? Do you have access to services when you're in Texas, when you're in Houston?
Say again?
Do you have access to victim services in Houston and Texas the way that other people do if this crime happened elsewhere? Because I believe you and I got connected through someone from victim services or through the DA. I'm just wondering, what is your connection to that?
Well, my connection was that was because I was looking for ways how I can talk to this audience,
Hmm.
and that's how I got connected to you, not so much for the services, but it's like what I can do to
What
help
you can
others.
do for other survivors.
Yes,
So
yeah.
can you tell us about, I didn't know that you have scholarship recipients. Can you tell us about the foundation? When did you develop it? What do you all do? And I understand you have a gala coming up. So tell us about all the work you're doing.
Yeah, so I started the foundation. It's known as the Kel Mabatah Foundation. I started in like 2020. So about 5 years now, and that was started because two of my high school friends are involved in the foundation today. They brought it to my they brought me to the idea that at the time like okay, I should be doing more and with my story and impacting more. So they brought this idea into a foundation. But I was like, at first, I was so focused on my recovery. So at first, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to focus on my recovery. I don't have time. I don't have time to run a foundation. But they
That's so
told me,
true.
like, listen, you can start small and you can grow as you want to.
Yes.
Then so then I thought about it. And then I thought about my purpose of still being here. So then I said, okay, let's do it. And then so that's how the foundation has grew today. And we basically we provide scholarships, we provide financial aid to other individuals that experience traumatic brain injuries or brain injuries in general, whether and we help people that don't either they don't have insurance or the insurance deny them or they can't afford it. So that's where we step in and fill that void. And why I decided to do it is because during my time as a patient, um, I I I I, I was a patient at Teal Memorial Hermann, and they're one of our partners where all our scholarship recipients receive therapy at. But during my time as a patient, you know, I would hear, and I had patients come up and tell me like, oh, my insurance is only giving like 6 visits for the year, or I don't have insurance at all. And I don't feel like health insurance, they don't know all it takes to recover from a brain injury. They think they think it's just in and out. In most cases, they don't want to cover what's necessary to recover from a brain injury. And outside of health insurance, which is not always good, um, there's not many resources one can go to fund brain injury rehabilitation. So that's so I stepped in. I stepped in and filled in that void for my foundation. So we award a number of scholarships each year, and like I said, you know, it's because of what happened to me that led me to starting this. So if it wasn't for my injury, no, I wouldn't be doing this. So as I said, you know, I view this as a blessing in disguise.
I mean, that's phenomenal. What an important gap to fill. such an important gap to fill, and thank you for sharing that. I also really appreciate you saying, I have a lot on my plate. I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to grow, and now you want me to do a foundation. I really appreciate the people who were in your life and helped say, we can build something small and look at what it's grown into. So I know you're familiar or you're fairly new to the field of restorative justice, but it is about accountability. It can be about reconciliation, but it's first and foremost about accountability. And I'm wondering if you had the chance to speak with the people who attacked you, would you want that opportunity, first of all? And then what would you want to say to them if you did take that opportunity?
Yeah, I would want the opportunity because one, I want to know, okay, why did you, because as far as I know, I don't know these people. Someone sent them to kill me. So I want to know, okay, why did you decide to agree to have someone send you to kill me? Like, what's the reason? And then second is like, I would thank them because they made me. Although they didn't kill me or in my life like I'm sure they thought they did, they made because of what happened to me in my experience with this, they made me a stronger, better man. And I now know what my purpose is. So I would thank them for what they did because you know they made me a better person because of this.
I'm just sitting with that. I think that's I think it's very hard for people to understand who have not been through what you've been through to understand that. Um, it's so beyond the concept of retribution and traditional justice and an eye for an eye. It's so outside of that realm that I just wanted to sit with that for a second. I'm also wondering about, do you feel like people have to I think a lot of people think restorative justice, that kind of dialogue, that they can't imagine that you would have to forgive. Do you think forgiveness would be necessary in your case? Or do you think it should be part, um, I won't even say what you think about for other people. In your case, do you think it would be necessary as part of your journey as a survivor?
Yes, because you know, the Christian side of me, since I'm such a big man of faith, you know, of course, you know, forgiveness is stress a lot, and in the Bible. So of course, as a Christian, you know, it's important to me to have to forgive him. I may not forget, I won't forget, you know, but I can forgive him because you know that this is Nigeria, so they may have reasons for why they did it. Or maybe some pay them a lot of money. In Nigeria, they do anything for money. So who knows what the reason was for them doing what they did to me? But at the end of the day, um, uh, the Christian in me it's important to forgive him. Not I won't forget, but I can forgive and I can move on in my life. And I think that's important. That's an important step in healing. Because if you're holding on to something, you will never heal from what you experience. But if you're able to like forgive the person or whatever, forgive what happened to you and forgive whoever did to you, and you're able to put that behind you, then you can move on, and then you can move on into healing, into getting better, and to fulfilling your purpose. But I don't, and me personally, I don't think you can move on and to your purpose and healing and getting better if you don't forgive. You know, if you're always holding resentment, that's not gonna do you any good. So I feel like in my case, I feel like it was important for me to forget, not forget, but forgive.
Yeah. And I think, and I appreciate you saying the words in my case because it's different for every person, and whatever that victim or survivor needs is what they need. And it may not be forgiveness. It may not be something that they desire or that they find helpful. But I also wanted to just pause for a second and see if there's any questions. I see a few people who had registered. Um, oh, hi, Deshandria. We have a Restorative Houston mom. Her Child is in one of our programs. I see. So if any of you have a question, go ahead and drop it now. Or any comments even. I think the speakers appreciate comments in real time. I'm gonna pause. I do have further questions, but just for Lakeydra or Cheryl, is there anything you wanted to respond to that you've heard so far? Anything you wanted to add on to? So I will go on to my next question. And this is for anyone, what do you wish the general public understood when it comes to supporting victims? And this can be for anyone.
I think the biggest thing that we have to remember when supporting victims is we have to get out of our what we think we should do or what they should do. The first thing is I always feel that, when we have convictions or any survivor that wants to finally share their story or finally convict the person, because they have up to 5 years to do it, once they have a rape kit and those things. But um, a lot of people are like, well, why don't you tell the story right then and there? Or why didn't you do this? So I wish people understand, like, give everybody grace when they're ready to share, let them share and don't victim shame them if they don't choose to share or when they do. So that's one thing I want them to understand. Like, don't give anybody a time limit on when they can share their story.
Mm-hmm. Cheryl, did you have
Yeah, I was going to add to that I completely agree. And allowing victims the autonomy to decide how they want to heal, when they want to heal, the way they want to heal, giving them the freedom and supporting them in that journey, because everybody is going to look different. Everybody's going to have different needs. Everybody's going to have different processes. And so just being open and saying, I'm here for you. What do you need? How can I support you as you go through this?
Thank you. Kel, is there anything you would add? What do you wish the general public understood when it comes to supporting victims?
Well, the only thing I would add is like I the only thing I would add is to make sure like you always show like compassionate and empathy because that's important. You may not you may not understand unless you've gone through it yourself, you won't understand what the victim is going through. But you can try to listen as much as you can and just be there for the person and say some encouraging words. So that's the thing I would say, just remember to be compassionate and show empathy and just care, because that's the most important thing is just care.
So what are the services, Lakeydra, could you speak to what services do victims of and or Cheryl of violent crime have access to? And how is it offered? My understanding is after the crime occurs, you can be informed about these are the things you have access to, but afterwards, after a trial, you're not going to then be re-informed that you have access to victim offender dialogue. So what services do folks in Texas have access to?
I know for me, and I'll let Cheryl speak on this as well. Like for me, I know that we have, when I go to a hospital, when a victim is there, initially there, we do the actual victim crime compensation. We give them a book of resources, right? And so victim crime compensation is very big because it helps with counseling. It helps with also paying for the medical bills, things like that. And we also, if because we're having a hard time with getting money for victim services, we also have nonprofits. Like in Dallas, we have Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center or the Turning Point, those places like that, where we can get victims services. So we do have a lot, of services here. It's just mostly you have to get approval, and that's the sad part because sometimes you don't get approval. I don't care if you have like details of what happened. Sometimes you don't get approval. But victim compensation is that's the biggest thing that we have here in Texas.
Thank you. Cheryl, were you going to add anything?
Well, I mean, the stuff that I do is just for a very specific program for the VOB program. And so, it's one of those situations where it's victim initiated. And so, does the state really want to be reaching out to victims and saying, hey, after the fact, hey, don't forget you have the right to meet with your offender face to face, because all victims are different. That could be traumatizing for some victims to even for somebody to reach out to them. And so that's why it has to be victim initiated, which makes it kind of a conundrum because a lot of people don't know about it, because they're informed about it at the beginning that they have that right. But at the beginning, right after the crime happened, the trauma level is so high, remembering something like that is, highly unlikely. So I know a lot of victims have said to me that I've done mediations with, I wished I had heard about this program sooner. I wished I knew about it sooner. But then the question becomes, how do you do that without potentially harming somebody or triggering somebody? And so, that's why it has to be victim initiated.
How do you think we bridge that?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I really don't.
it's a really delicate balance, I can imagine. Yeah.
I know I like the idea. I love a lot of things that Cheryl says. She knows I do. But I really feel like when we are called out to these, these crimes, I feel like that should be something that's in the pamphlet where we're saying, hey, here are some more options that you have. If you want to sit and talk to, your perpetrator, if you want to have a mediator there, I think that should be in the pamphlet that we give out to our victims. And hopefully they'll allow us to do that. But I think that is very powerful if we're able to provide that in those packets.
Cheryl, can you speak a little bit more about your book so that we can shift to thinking a little bit about institutions? Because we want to support survivors individually, but then there's also institutional ways to, I think, prevent crime or to have systems in place to keep people accountable. And if there's not, there could or should be. So can you talk a little bit about what your book is messaging?
Yeah, it's really written from a faith perspective. And it came out of what I heard from victims in the last 20 years doing this work. That the victims that have gone through the processes have had significant issues with two institutions where they felt like they hadn't, not everybody, so just keep in mind that not everybody's had the same experiences, but a lot of victims have felt re-traumatized by the actual traditional court system itself. And so the system that's supposed to be, providing them justice and accountability is failing them. And I always tell people, if our justice system was working, why did I just get assigned case number 2,821 of a victim saying, I want to meet with my offender? Because I don't feel like justice has been, even though they're in prison, it's not necessarily enough. And so what the justice system itself is traumatizing for survivors or victims. And then the other one that I heard quite frequently is how the faith community was harmful as well. Through victim blaming, through forcing forgiveness before people are ready to forgive, and for all of those types of reasons. And on top of that, sadly, as we're seeing a lot more now in the news, our faith communities, a lot of our leaders in our faith communities, have been perpetrators, and it's been brushed under the carpet, pushed, just moved aside. And so the book was written to say, we can be doing a better job. We can be doing a better job both with our justice systems and both with our faith communities. And so the primary target audience is really the faith community for the book, to say, do you have systems in place within your community, within your church, within your synagogue, within your faith space that is protecting people and not perpetuating a rape culture? And if you don't, how do you begin to put those things in place? And what are you going to do if somebody does come forward and report? What are the appropriate ways to handle the situation? Because like I said, from a lot of the victims I've worked with, when they've gone forward and shared that with people in leadership in their faith communities, the responses were extremely inappropriate, harmful, and re-traumatizing. And so that's the reason why I wrote the book.
But I will say I wouldn't want anyone in the audience to think that if it's faith-based, that it actually wouldn't apply to them necessarily, because I feel like the framework you offer applies to all institutions.
And I
And
tried to do that. Even though I specifically wrote it to the faith community, the whole idea was that these things can be used anywhere. It can be in a business, it can be in a nonprofit, it can be within a justice system, it can be within a church. They could be used anywhere. When I first saw the transformative power of restorative justice, I started thinking, what makes this work, and would it apply in other contexts? And became really passionate about seeing how can we apply it in other contexts. And it can be, it can either be in the truest form of restorative justice, or it can be in restorative practices. And when it's implemented in other contexts, it's just as transformative, it's just as powerful, and it makes things happen much more rapidly and significantly. So thank you for adding that, because you're right. It can be used in any context, in a business, in a nonprofit, in
And
a
I'm
church.
just going to ask you one final question about the it you're speaking to, because the whole final section of your book is how do you create a restorative climate and culture where you're having conversations in advance about things like rape culture or hierarchy or whatever the topics are. You even use topics like white supremacy. You talk about systems of power. What are some of the things you offer? What are restorative practices that you think some of these institutions, schools, nonprofits, corporations can put in place?
Well, the first thing, there's several things. One of them, I would say educate yourself about restorative justice. What does it mean? What are the elements of restorative justice? Which of those elements can you implement into your culture so that you have that more restorative accountability type of setting? Then the second thing would be, do you need to implement restorative practices, like victim offender dialogue? Do you want to offer those types of things for whatever whatever your community is? And then the probably one of the most significant processes in restorative justice is circles. And so, I would really encourage people to explore, what does it mean to do circles? What does circles look like? And they can be used to do, as you know, with the work that you do, they are so powerful in transforming communities and transforming lives. And so, those would be the three things that I would say. Look at systems. I mean, look at your culture. What restorative justice practices can you infuse into the culture of your organization or church? And then what processes would be beneficial for the people that you're serving?
Thank you so much. Yes, and you offer those trainings. We're going to be offer those trainings, and people can find all sorts of organizations that train in these spaces. Lakeydra, I noticed you nodding vociferously when she was speaking. Did I say that right? When she was speaking about her experiences with getting not getting supported in the faith community. Can you speak a little bit to what your face was saying?
Yeah, so I don't know what that word was you said, whatever,
Very
whatever
much
that
so.
word. Yeah. But I will be honest, I grew up in church, and my grandfather was a pastor. So one of my perpetrators was in the church, right? And so we never discussed what happened because, again, the church is like, okay, let's take you to go pray about it. It'll be fine. You'll be, okay. And then when I said I struggled with depression and things like that, and I was suicidal, it was, no, that's a demon. And so I think what she was saying is very it does needs to be discussed in the churches a little bit more, like what can we do, how do we those people who did that in church, how do we hold them accountable? And for me, I would have loved to go and tell the woman who did this to me, like, hey, I want to know why me, why did you target me? Is there, I would want to hear from her. I definitely would. So just learn about restorative justice is amazing, because I think in that situation in the church or just wherever you are, that gives me power back to know that, okay, number one, you told me what I've done, or you told me what you've said what you've done, and then now I feel like I can heal a little bit more, instead of just putting you in jail and not ever talking about why did you do this. And maybe that person, another thing, maybe this person has dealt with trauma in their life, and so it's repeated, so now it's letting them heal as well. So we're both healing, so it's just listening. Just my mom was just thinking about everything. So that's why I was shaking my head.
No, it's interesting. All three of you have spoken about having some connection to a faith community. And I'm not Christian, so I can't relate to that. So it's actually really helpful for me to hear. Kel, what was what was like, do you have a regular church you go to, or what was the faith-based community's response to what you had been through?
Uh, that's a good question. Well, I go to I go to it's like Southwest Baptist Church. Um, and I just started going recently, a new church, because I started going with my one of my he was one of my friends, but he was my middle school coach, and I've known him since elementary and middle school. He's my basketball coach in elementary and middle school. I view him as a father figure. So I started going to a new church with him, that the same church he goes to. Um, and oddly enough, so I started in January, but 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 uh but but yes, last Sunday when I was in church, I felt like the pastor was like talking to me. He's like, uh, he was talking about like, being a living testimony for others, and then I've seen him a few times, but then after the church service, I was like, okay, go and introduce yourself to him, because let him know that I'm not the average person in church. So. I shook his hand. And he asked, "Okay, what's up, man? How you doing?" And then I shook, and then we had small conversations. But then I actually, but actually, no, I felt God was telling me, is okay, go back and really introduce yourself to him. So, so I sat down. He was talking to someone, and then when he came back out, that's when I was walking out. That's when I approached him, and I just introduced him. Introduced myself to him, and I told him about a little about myself. You know, that I have a living testimony, and that I'd like to meet with him. And share my testimony with him. And then he said, okay, call my office and schedule appointment. Um, so and then I told him, like, I have a foundation, uh, I have a foundation that helps other people with brain injuries. And he's okay, great. Tell me about that when we meet. And then all enough, when he left, someone else came up to him, uh, and and then I could hear him. And then he was like, "Oh, my father is in the hospital. He just had a stroke." Like 5 seconds after I said I have a foundation, um, that so I say that is to say, like, I haven't I haven't really I haven't really like outside of it's tough to explain. I haven't really had an opportunity to like to share it to share it in the faith community yet, and I'm hoping to change that, because now I'm ready. You know, before I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to share it on that level, but now. Especially going to this new church for a few months now, and every sermon, I feel like, oh, he's talking to me. It's like, okay, God is telling me that, okay, I need to take the next step and share my testimony. So I'm hoping to be more involved in my story, and just being more involved in church, from my experience in the later months. Because right now I have a lot going on. So when things calm down, then I hope to like be more involved in the church, and just use my testimony to help others.
Thank you. I was just curious, since we're talking about institutions, we're talking about churches or nonprofits or the government. Cheryl, you said that there's a long waiting list for these cases. And then Lakeydra, I'm thinking about in particular child sexual assault, because a lot of the youth that I work with have been through child sexual assault, or incest. These things won't get reported, but particularly if it was another child in their family who molested them, their families are really struggling, a lot of them, with showing support for the child in a way that the child doesn't feel like you abandoned me because you haven't pursued criminal actions against this other person. Um, and B, like, how do you maintain you're going to come across this family member? Are there ways, can you have a culture of accountability? I believe you can, outside of systems. And how do you do that with care?
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Um, kind of what Lakeydra and I said earlier about allowing victims to define how they want to go through the process. That's a part of it. Do you want to report or do you not want to report? I know there are victims, especially when it's family members. I mean, I watched a testimony. I mean, I watched a woman in a webinar that was speaking about restorative justice who was sexually assaulted by her father. And she said plainly, I didn't want him to go to prison. I just wanted somebody to make him stop. And so giving victims the power to decide how they want to do that, how they want to proceed goes back to that autonomy. I do know, since this book has come out, because it just came out a couple of months ago, I've had 2 different incidents where people have contacted me who had been survivors of child sexual assault, who did not press charges, and are now adults saying, I think I want to look into this to see, can we facilitate a dialogue around this, because this has impacted all our families. And so I've had 2 different families within the last couple of months say, is restorative justice a process that could help bring healing in those circumstances? And my answer is always going to be a resounding yes. I mean, there's no guarantee of anything. But the process itself, I mean, it's so well researched, and as you know from the work you're doing in Houston, it does make a difference. And so I think there are options for people when it comes to child sexual assault, and especially within family structures, where restorative justice can be another tool that can be used to address that.
And Cheryl, are the people reaching out to you? Are they wanting you to facilitate these processes? Are they wanting you to refer them to go through the state? Do you feel comfortable working outside of the bounds of a volunteer through the state process?
Yes, and yes, and yes. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I would facilitate it because that's what I've done for 20 something years, and so if somebody wanted to do a circle around a sexual assault within a family, there's structures that would need to be in place and processes that would need to be in place to ensure that it's done right. And I would feel comfortable doing that. But I've also been asked to make recommendations for, in other areas. And so yeah.
And I only ask because restorative justice, this is an indigenous way of being. This is how this comes from, our ancestors. This is not something that a government structure has to own. Um, or, and so that's why I ask, but at the same time, how do you ensure that this person is equipped
Right.
to engage in that process?
Right. And they need, and especially if they're going to address any kind of trauma, you need to be trained. You need to be trained significantly. And I know of 2 groups. I know of 2 individuals. One is a church that's using circles for minors who have been sexually assaulted, and they're actually creating healing circles with them amongst themselves, and they're having dialogues around it. I know of a nonprofit here in Texas in the Waco area it's called Space for Love, and they're using the circle processes as a way to bring healing for survivors of sexual assault. So there are resources out there, people that are starting to see the power of it and implement it. And so I'm just so thankful for opportunities like this today, and for you and for what you're doing to bring the awareness that, hey, we can do more, and we can offer more, and we can provide more.
And
But we
we're
need,
doing this in Texas.
yes.
In Texas, and that Texas has been a leader in this. And how do we reframe the things that are coming out of Texas?
Right. With one of the worst, with some of the bad, leading prison statistics in the nation.
Leading prison, leading punitive culture.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Death penalties, all of that.
Yeah, it's all true. Yeah.
Yeah, but yet we're providing opportunities for victims that others aren't doing. So.
Right. Lakeydra, did you want to add to that?
I mean, majority of the ones I work with are, still minors. So it's the whole thing of like when we do talk to the family, when I have like a 2 year old, maybe 3 year old, talking to the family's like, I think they're, I hate to say this, but it's like, I think they're lying. So that part is sad when it's a 2 year old and a 7 year old perpetrator or whatever. So it's like these conversations need to be had. And I would love if Cheryl could sometimes kind of help me to talk to these family members to say, hey, even though my child is a minor and he's or she is doing this to another minor, like what options do I have instead of saying, no, we're not going to talk about this? Because when that child gets older, what's going to happen? The trauma is going to be there. So getting to the bottom of it as soon as it happens, I think is very important. So I was just listening on, cases that I've been involved in recently that these kids are so young and, you know, they're not doing anything about it.
Yes, especially at that young of an age to internalize that I'm not believed. And then what happens to that child as they move on in the system. I'm wondering if there's people who watch this in the future who have survived a violent crime or a childhood trauma and are seeking support or just any words of wisdom or messages. Um, what would you want to say to them? Kel, if you want to start, what would you offer if you're comfortable?
Yeah, I would just say like you know, no matter no matter how tough it gets, just never give up, and the fact that the fact that you survived means you're still here for a reason. So just, always stay positive, keep hope alive, because if you don't have hope, then it's not possible to overcome anything. But with hope and faith and determination, you can overcome what happened to you, and you can live a life. And don't be defined by being a victim. Use it as motivation to come back stronger.
Thank you.
I think for me, one thing I would say is define what healing is for you. Even though we may have been through the same situation, how we heal may be different and our experiences are different, regardless. So find out what works for you and just heal that way. Yeah, so that's all I have.
I would encourage them to, seek support, keep looking until you find somebody who's going to provide some sort of resources for you. I would also encourage them that human beings are capable of so much. I mean, the resilience of human nature. I've just been astounded by what people can experience and still come back on the other side. Like Kel, I mean, it's a beautiful example of experiencing something so horrible and traumatic, and look at how beautiful his life is now. Human beings are just so resilient and capable of so much. And I would encourage anybody who's been through something to hang in there. Like he said, hang in there. There's more than you realize that's ahead of you. If you can just hang in there and find you somebody who will be your cheerleader and support you as you're hanging in there.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to the three of you because when you speak of resilience, I mean Cheryl's speaking of herself and Lakeydra and Kel. I encourage people to look these people up and follow them and read more about their stories because it truly is remarkable. And then for you to be astounded by other people's story, I think speaks to how unique crime is. There's no universal feeling of what it is to be a survivor or a victim. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you. And this reminded us that restorative justice is rooted in this connection and compassion and community, but also in accountability. And so I'm really grateful for you for talking about all the ways that systems are falling short or all the ways that the systems are trying to step up, but also how you've individually stepped up for other people going through similar situations. And so I would ask people in the audience that we encourage you to stay connected. If you would like more resources, to please reach out to us. We'll be sharing this on our website and on our social media. And on behalf of Restorative Houston and all our partners, we want to thank you again for showing up and being part of this movement. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us and for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate y'all. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
All right. Bye.